wouldn't you go along and say to get the Minister to say, next Sunday, the people from the electoral office are coming here with a ballot box, and I want you to bring your filled out forms along and deposit them. That might be a way of getting some of the people in our communities that vote at a very low level out to vote. I just think, you know, the bus didn't do anything for me. I'm with Councillor Lee on that. You know, I saw the bus at Sylvia Park on the opening of one of those big apartment stores, and there were thousands of people there, and the bus was 300 metres away from where the crowds were, and I was the only person talking to the staff there. So I just think we need to approach it in a different way, particularly in those communities where the turnout is low. Now, I'm not putting on council officers the blame for a low turnout. There's a whole lot of reasons, and I think we've had good discussions around the fact that there is no civic education in our schools now, apart from what you maybe tried to do. Yeah. But actually, how many people got invited to schools to put the case for what the issues were and why you were running for council, or for that matter, to parliamentarians? Schools shy away from actual practical politics. They think it's being partisan. What we should be doing is encouraging any and all of the candidates to come along and to put their case to the kids so that the kids understand what it's about. The media. You know, I know the media are independent, and I'm not doing a trump on it, but, you know, I'm sure you had some of the same experience I had, where you go along to a local paper for heaven's sake, a suburban newspaper, and you're in the patch and you're wanting to talk and you want to raise the issues. No, we're not paying much attention to that. And the coverage, even in the local papers, was pretty slender. Now, you know, they make their own decision. I accept that. That's their right. But don't we enter into a conversation that says, you are local. These are local elections. Why wouldn't you want to try to engender some support, some debate through what you're doing? So I think we've just got to, and not leave it till 3 months before the next election, but we've got to think about some of those issues and how we can go about it in a different way. And if we can learn things, you know, don't have to go as far away as Nelson. I mean, the turnout, I think, Councillor Lee in Great Barrier is about 50–60%, isn't it?
No, it's about 65. Waihiki's 58, and the rest of it was about in the 40s.
Yeah, and it might be a matter of scale, but I just think we've got to make some real efforts to get a far better result than what not only Auckland was getting, but local authorities across the country. And that's why I think, you know, participating with what local government New Zealand is doing, and Councillor Hulse will be playing a role in that, talking to the select committee and trying to lift the importance of this issue. Because democracy only works if people take the time to participate. And maybe it's our fault too, because they'll only participate if they think what we are doing is relevant in their lives. Right. So I'm not pointing the finger, I'm saying we all have to work together and address those particular factors. Anyway, that's just about exhausted my time. Yes. Marguerite, would you like to comment?
So, Your Worship, I just would like to correct your interpretation of the report, because what the report is saying is that among the 80 events that the Love Bus attended, we did 22 community presentations, and the attendance to these 22 was 800. We estimate the reach of the Love Bus to about 24,000 people, and that number is not in the report.
I guess the challenge I still have is, you know, I'm sorry, I just don't believe the survey data. People don't tell you the truth, and you know that. 63% claim to have voted. We know that's not true. X% claim to have been influenced by the campaign, but being influenced by the campaign doesn't actually have much meaning if it doesn't persuade them to vote. So I guess, thank you for that correction. You're quite right on that. But my point stands. Under Section 4, we say it's successful, and it was a successful marketing campaign, but hey, we lifted the vote turnout by 3%, and that's not something really any of us should feel really happy about. So that's why I say, go back to my major point, let's look at how we can get to wider audiences and how we can actually encourage people to fill those papers out and to deposit them. Next, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and I agree with much of what you've said. I just wanted to focus my attention on voter participation, and especially out south. I think interestingly, the lowest area for voter turnout for their ballots was Otara, yet conversely, they had a really high level of satisfaction with how council's doing. So someone suggested to me on the campaign trail that maybe that's why the voter turnout was so low, was they were really happy, and I was chair of the board at the time, so maybe they were happy with me. The point being, though, is and Councillor Walker picked up on this, but when you're looking at South Auckland in particular, we are talking about the poorer, browner communities, and they're the ones who aren't voting. And I know that there was specific attempts to target these voters and make sure that they came out to vote. But beneath that, we're talking about transient families as well. These voting papers are sent to houses that they might not even be at. I remember on the campaign trail going, and there were people who said, oh no, that person hasn't lived here for years. And so we've got to get below some of these issues, and it's not just about getting this kind of information and saying, okay, let's set up groups. We've got to actually understand that there are Pacific academics, of which I have some, and I agree with much of what they're saying, who are now suggesting that there is a deliberate attempt to make sure that these people aren't housed because it means they can't participate in democracy. And I think if we're going to increase voter participation, especially amongst newer Aucklanders, or new Aucklanders was the term that I've heard today, then we've got to think widely about how we engage these people. We've got to think outside of the box, and we've got to make sure that those communities are involved in the things that we're doing so that they understand the very power that they wield if they are in fact going to cast a vote. And you've got, not only have you got transient families, we've got families who are living in garages, we've got families who are in the main out south are renting. All of those cumulative issues are issues that our people are facing. And so, sure, I jest when I talk about how the satisfaction level of people in Otara was pretty high, but it saddens me no degree to the fact that they aren't participating. And we do everything we can. I go to churches myself, and I say to people, I don't care actually if you vote for me or not. What I care about is that we get into the practice of participating. And I think we as a council, even hearing today that, what can we do to emulate the 52% of other parts of the country that are getting 52%? Well, actually, I don't think we should be proud of that either. The fact that only 1 in 2 people are voting in other parts of New Zealand is actually quite embarrassing, I think. And so for us as a diverse community, a community that is saying we're inviting new Aucklanders, we want you to be a part of the fabric of this community, then it is highly important that we ensure that their voices are heard in the planning of how we outreach to them and in the ways in which they understand how democracy works. You look at Samoa and the level of voter participation in Samoa, and you'll see it's a whole lot higher. We can learn from the people of Samoa. And I think that the whole diverse thinking needs to take into account the very point you made earlier, Warwick, around how the Samoan matae, my own matae is on my name card just in front. But what that signals is the fact that our needs and our expectations as people who are migrant arrivals to New Zealand, our needs and expectations are different, perhaps. And so we should get some more information on this. But I think matae titles, because they do, what it is it's a name that delineates title in the village. So it's actually a name. But that's what we've got to understand. And if that's an emerging issue, then it shows that the emerging issues perhaps around why people aren't participating in the voter process is because they're not seeing themselves in the process, the things that they come with, the culture that they come with in the process. I think we can do more, and I expect us to be able to do more. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Casey.
I just want to testify to the diligence of our bylaws compliance staff in chasing up 162 billboard complaints. It gave me the funniest day of the election when I got an early morning call to say I had a giant penis on my billboard between St Luke's and New North Road, and could I clean it up before the end of the day or they would come and drop it down.
Must have been a Scottish one.
While I was there, I cleaned the smaller penis from Mayor Phil Goff's billboard.
So kind. You should have left the mayor's penis alone.
Oh, good on them, Mike. Pass that back to compliance. They did it in a beautiful manner. I've got two questions. Not two questions. I've got two suggestions. One has been well canvassed, and I won't go over it. Civics in schools is not something you do in election year. It's something we look at now between elections. And just on that, out comes a broken record. One of the things that Auckland City Council did well was they produced a brochure which had a face of the mayor, the 20 councillors, the 21 local boards, 6 CCOs and the Independent Maori Statutory Board. I keep asking. It's useful to give out to kids, to visitors, to delegations from overseas, and yet it doesn't ever go anywhere. How many times have I said this? And it's not a big cost, and I know it only lasts 3 years, but all of us would make use of it, and you as an organisation would make use of it, and it would give people the chance to actually understand how everything fits together, because that's the bit that the public out there don't get. They just don't get. They don't get how we all work. So I'm making that suggestion again. I'd like to be on the wee group that's looking at, I love elections, happy to add to it. And that's probably all. It's been a good discussion, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to really, taking everything, is to commend the council for the efforts it's made, because there's no doubt that we've really tried hard and have made progress in some areas, but not to beat ourselves up about it. I mean, if we're honest and we look at the trends in society over the last couple of decades, if we look at our last national election when I think nearly 1 million people didn't vote, and it receives a lot more attention and it is a lot more personalised than local body elections, there's a cultural problem that's not contained to New Zealand. It goes across the Western world. Occasionally that's bucked, as you see in some of these referendums, like the independence vote in Scotland, where people do personalise it. They do see that they've got a personal interest in it. So we're up against it, and I think it's important to acknowledge that and not sort of think that some slight change of tack is actually going to address a fundamental problem. I do think, however, that it's very important to draw a distinction between the wards, and I don't know if we necessarily do that. The differences between each ward and, in fact, within wards are stark, and you have to pitch your approach to those differences, both ward-wise and in the ward. I mean, we have a situation in our ward where the voter turnout is quite significantly different from one part of the ward to the other, yet theoretically it should be the same, because it's basically same kind of socio-economic dynamic, but it's not. So there's subtleties there that reflect the expectations and the view of council by those communities, but to realistically address what we're talking about here, you really have to pitch down to that level, and I think, as the Mayor said, you have to utilise the local papers. And in recent years, I hope none of them here to blackmark me, they've definitely moved away from covering local politics, and that's been a conscious decision, and that's something that's more apparent now than it was last year. So that doesn't help, because for a lot of our communities, or at least people who are potentially going to vote, they get their news from their local paper, and if there's nothing much in there, or it's a kind of sterile council press release on something, that's not going to engage them. So they've got more of a role to play. Certainly, some people via social media make an impact in certain parts of the community, but overall that's a big ask too. So I guess I just really wanted to thank Marguerite and the team for the efforts they made, because they're highly commendable, but also not to sort of underestimate the trend in terms of politicisation or lack of it in our community, but also to throw in there that if you want to do something, maybe even pick out a couple of wards and go hard out in those wards and really personalise it and see if that makes a difference, because the message that goes to Manukau or to Howick, to Albany, it's got to be quite a different one. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Last speaker I've got recorded here is Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I do want to say thank you to the staff. I know that you've probably done really well, but I don't think the marketing campaign was successful either. And I think one of the sad thing is the engagement and activities and events weren't even run in every single local board, only 15 of the 21. And then I noticed in the cost of the election, the initial elections budget had no allocation for community engagement. And I think You know, I think that's an oversight. I want to support Councillor Casey on her suggestion of putting a whole council family thing together, and I think one of the places that it could be distributed most beneficially would be through real estate agents. Because someone else has mentioned, and apologies for not knowing, but some people don't know what ward they're in.
Exactly.
Still. And I think that if local real estate agents had the boundaries clearly defined when they bought and sold a house, that part of that pack was welcome to your new home. By the way, here are your local representatives. That would be a real positive thing. At least people would know that they'd moved into the something ward and they were represented by these people. So I totally support you, Councillor, and I think that would be, you know, relatively easy to do.
Question, if I may?
I think we should keep
quick question.
Beasley on.
Yep, and then Councillor Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, just a very quick question on your B, the establishment of a political reference group. Given that some of these issues have a crossover with the work that Phil Wilson is doing on the governance issues, did you give consideration, rather than establishing a whole new group, we've already got a group that's composed of councillors and local board members, could their work be incorporated to include this?